Hi, and welcome to Care. We missed you last week. It was a holiday, so we didn't get to see you. We're back, and today we're discussing grief. We thought that with all the crime, with everything that's going on, so many people are losing their children to the gang wars, people are losing their parents. We thought it prudent to deal with the loss of a loved one. How do you handle that grief? And joining us on set today, we have quite a full house. We have Sarah Ince, who's an oncologist and family physician. So of course, you know, Sarah deals with cancer patients on a regular basis. And I'm gonna leave it for Sarah to discuss. I'm gonna leave her to introduce, you know, all of these different stories and why, you know, she has a wealth of experience with dealing with grief. And then we have, next to Sarah, we have the founder of Tema International, and Tema International deals with widows and widowers. And then we have Mr. and Mrs. Neves. They are the founder of the Jason Neves Foundation, and based on the name, you can tell that it came about through their own loss, and so we're definitely looking forward to hearing from them. All right, I'm gonna pass it on now, and we'll of course, get our guests to introduce themselves, why they've gotten into what you've gotten into, and then we get into all the different stages and how we deal with grief. So who are we going to start with? Let's start with Sarah.
First of all, I'd like to say thank you to Marcia for inviting me to be on the show. I am actually a combination of a family physician with an interest in oncology. I've spent about 10 years in the United Kingdom doing both internal medicine and oncology. And as oncology suggests, it is basically dealing with patients who have cancer. And we don't only just deal with the patients, but we deal with their families. And of course, grief is a constant companion. So when Marcia asked if I'd be interested in coming along today, I said, of course. Because grief is not just about dying and loss of a loved one, as we'll find out. There are many types of loss that we will experience in our lives that will cause us to grieve. So I'll hand over to the person next to me.
Good afternoon. I am Shailene Mitchell-Beaumont, the visionary that God has entrusted with a non-profit organization that focuses on the needs of widows and widowers, a gift of love, divinely inspired, meeting the needs of widows and widowers everywhere. And that has afforded me to make some divine connections in the one person, Miss Gail Neves, the founder of the Jason Neves, Nothing But Heart and Love Foundation. And based on my story, I was able to connect with her. And
are you going to tell us the story?
No, I would just be passing on the mic right now.
Oh yes, good afternoon. I'm Andrew Neve, Gail's husband. We are the founders of the Jason Neves Foundation. And I'm a total supporter of my wife, who is actually doing, you know, the work for the foundation, and who carries on the Grief Share program. So over to her.
Good afternoon, Trinidad and Tobago.
And the Caribbean.
And the Caribbean. Well, the Jason Neves Nothing But Heart and Love Foundation was founded in January 2011. What we do, we support families with children who are diagnosed with heart disease and heart problems. I got involved in Grief Share as the result of the death of my son. He died from congenital heart failure. He was 25 years of age. It was tough. This is what, I couldn't understand the dynamics of grief. When I lost my son, it was a blow to me.
How many years ago was this?
It's 7 years ago now. To date, it's 7 years. He died in 2009. And sometimes it's still a little tough talking about it, I realize.
I can imagine.
But I know that I've come a long way. And with my experience, I wanted to help people. The impact of grief on my life, it allowed me to open up to see what other people was going through. And I was amazed at the severity of all the emotions and stuff that you go through. And I was also amazed that there's no help available to people, to grieving people. And so I wanted to help, and I went online, I looked around, I tried to put together a program to help people suffering with grief. who've lost their loved ones. What we did, well, we have a program. I got a program online which is Grief Share. It's a 13-week program where you deal with different issues, you know, governing grief. And it is quite, it's a dynamic program where people, you get into the heart of grief, you deal with all the issues, things that people don't speak about, things that affect you, and you're even sometimes ashamed to speak about it. For instance, when you look, grief, it carries different emotions. One of the emotions that really stand out to me is the emotion of guilt. You don't know that you suffer guilt and shame and all of that. Even if it is not, it doesn't matter the type of death, but in particular when somebody dies, and in some instances the family, they have to do like, they have to pull the plug, as you say, on them. You would be relieved that this person is out of their suffering, but at the final feelings that you get is guilt, because you feel a relief for them, but then again you feel guilty that you are relieved that they're gone. So it's really a ball of
And then you've had to,
emotion.
I mean, I think in a case where, you know, for me, it's only ever been on television where, you know, that lifeline and the decision, do we pull, do we not pull, what kind of life are they going to live? So, I mean, even in that, I'm sure that brings a level of guilt for the decision made. You know, I mean, I can only imagine, you know, let's say you have this family and it's a father and the mother has to make this decision that I'm going to pull the plug. I could imagine what the children are feeling towards that mother and the responsibility and the burden that that mother would have to make.
Yes, that is quite true, because with grief, your emotion runs deeper than normal. When you're grieving, everything, it's amplified. And sometimes you think that you think you're going crazy. That is one of the feelings you get, but you're not. You're just grieving. You're just grieving, and you ought to take your time and grieve. A lot of people want to push you through grief, but that is not the answer for grief. You need to go through your grief, take your time, go through, and you'll come out there. You go through with God, because God is the author and finisher of all things. And you know, it's a strange thing with grief, whether you believe in God or not. When that time comes, you look at God. You look at God. There are people who will tell you they don't believe in God, but when somebody dies, their eyes are trained on God, and they ask, most of the time, we all ask negative, why? Why is this happening to me? Why did I lose my loved one? If God is so good, why does this hurt so much? But this is not, it's not, God is not doing anything to hurt you. We came in a world where everything existed already. There was always pain, people were always dying, and you are in this world. But what you need to do when you're grieving, you need to trust God. You need to get in there and trust God with your pain. Because God, learning about God in your grief, it's the only way to find true healing.
So in your 13 weeks, you know, for someone who does not believe in God, can they find comfort in your seminar?
Yes.
In your 13 weeks? Or is it, you know, tell us about the 13 weeks. Go through, you know, week 1, week 2, week 3.
Okay.
You know, what are the different stages of grief? You know, I could start, but I don't want to jump, because I would say, you know, what are the different stages? You know, if that would be for me the first step.
Well, the first-
I've had the roughest 2 months of my life, so it's the first time that I think that I've ever had to deal with any kind of grief, and I mean, so it's very funny, it's very coincidental that this is the topic that we're dealing with, you know, because I feel like it's going to be a real lesson for me today. You know, what are the stages? Because I heard you say something just now that people push you through grief, and that's exactly what, you know, for me it's been get up, get the show on the go, get everything going, put it past you, toughen up. And you know, I mean, my daughter even said, "Mommy, is this what you're doing?" Because she saw me get up yesterday and like clean the house and just get everything back together. And she was like, are you toughening up? Is that what you're doing? You know?
Yes, well, that is what people expect of you. They expect you, they want to rush you through grief. But grief doesn't end anytime soon.
What are the dangers of rushing through grief?
Rushing through grief means that, well, when you rush through
Guys,
grief...
I mean, if anyone else has, you know.
I think you touched on it. So if we look at grief as a process, the most important thing is to remember it's never a straight line. And a very, what we call the seminal piece of work on grief was done by a lady called Elizabeth Kubler-Ross back in 1969. She published a book, and she talks about the 5 stages of grief. And she makes the point that, yes, there are these 5 stages, but you can go from stage 1 to stage 3 to 5 and go all the way back. So you're quite correct when you say that, you know, you feel like you're being pushed through sometimes, but grieving is a natural process that you have to go through. And the first stage, obviously when you are given the bad news, the first stage is that of denial, because it's an instinctive response. We don't want to deal with the distress of the loss that we are going to have to face, or the loss that has just happened to us. So if you know, for example, that your loved one is dying, from the point that you discover that, you begin grieving. Far less if you kiss them goodbye in the morning and then get the phone call that they're gone. So sudden deaths versus deaths that we know are going to happen, it's a completely different grieving process in terms of the severity and the intensity of the emotion. So the first stage is denial, because you don't want to believe it and you want to protect yourself. Later on, you move into the stage of anger. You've got to do something with this emotion. You've got to direct it somewhere. So you use anger, and you can direct it towards the person who's been lost, the person who's caused the loss, for example, the doctor who's treating the patient, or even your best friend, because they say the wrong thing at the wrong time. You've got to get rid of this emotion, and you channel it out as anger. And that is an entirely human reaction. The next stage after that is the stage of bargaining. And a lot of the times we go back, and if we have a spiritual belief, we go to God and say, right, God, I'm going to pray really hard, and if you do this for me, I'm going to do this for you. Or you think, well, maybe if I'd gone to the doctor 2 months sooner, this wouldn't have happened to me, but I think if I do this, it's still not going to happen to me. And you can go back and forth between bargaining and anger, denial, and then you can jump to the next stage, which is depression. And there are 2 types of depression. There's the emotional depression, where you just withdraw and you contemplate what's happening. And you don't want to get out of bed, you don't want to eat, you don't want to interact with people. And then there's the other depression that comes with what you have to deal with. And then we move to the phase of acceptance. And that's when we realize we can't change what's going to happen, and we actually now have to start dealing with it.
I'm so sorry to cut you because we have to go on break. And I mean, I'm really enjoying hearing those 5 stages. So I think, you know, when we come back, you're going to summarize it again for us. Don't go anywhere. Today's topic is a little bit heavy, but we're going to try to keep it as comfortable as possible. We're discussing grief on CARE TV. Hi, and welcome back to CARE. Today we're discussing grief and dealing with the loss of a loved one. Before we get back into the stages of grief, Dr. Sarah Ince was going through the different processes for us. We're going to do our sex ed capsule. If you didn't notice, we've started over the series so that those of you that are now joining in CARE, you won't miss anything that you've missed in the last 7 weeks. So we're going to go straight to our sex ed capsule now.
Mommy, why do boys get to show their boobs?
That's because boys don't have boobs. A good way to know what's your private parts are the body parts that are covered by your swimsuits. So boys only have the bottom parts covered by their swimsuits, but the girls have the top and the bottom parts. And actually, we shouldn't use boobs because we should use the proper names for our private parts. Because if you have to report a bad person, not everyone's gonna know your home names.
What are home names, Mama?
Well, home names are the names that we use at home to describe our private parts. But the proper names for girls' private parts are called the breast, that's the top part, and the bottom parts are called the bottom. And for girls, it's called the vagina. But for the boys, it's called the bottom, and their private part's called the penis. And boys don't have boobs, so they don't have a top private part. Yes?
Okay, Mama.
All right.
Yes, that's been quite a popular segment. A lot of people have enjoyed. I've gotten a lot of responses saying that, you know, they haven't really thought about those kinds of conversations. And in fact, actually, the feedback thus far has really been good on care. So we thank you very much to all our upcoming fans that have reached out to us to say that, you know, the topics, they're really helping get through. And so once again, you know, thank you guys for coming on, because I think that, I mean, in just the preliminary conversations that we had, it's something that a lot of people haven't really dealt with. And if you're not dealing with it properly, you know, it just goes on later on. So Sarah, maybe you could just recap very quickly what the 5 stages of grief are, and you know, just remind the audience that you can actually go from stage 1 to 5 to 4 to 3 all over the place.
Yes, you can. It's never a straight line. So remember, the first phase, when you're first confronted with the loss, is that of denial. Anger, very common emotion, and a lot of us get stuck there. Then, of course, there's bargaining, there's depression, and acceptance. And there's a last stage, which is actually resolution, which is the end. But you can go through all those stages back and forth, and you're quite right when you say you sometimes feel pressurized to go through each stage. No, grief is a natural process, and we have to work through each phase.
But during the grieving process, I mean, life has to go on. You know, at the end of the day, life has to go on. So I feel like, how do we go through the grieving process and still go to work, still put on the face and do what needs to be done? Because the last thing that you want is to be grieving and then turn around and you're homeless because you haven't paid the bills.
Well, life goes on. That's all. Like, life goes on, and you do what you have to do. I know there are cases where some people really, they have to take a lot of time off, but it's not there for us to do, because in the institutions you have to go back to work. How many days they give for you for bereavement?
3 days.
3 days. How could you grieve in 3 days? How could you be over at any point in 3 days? 3 days is certainly not enough.
So then what are some of the things that we can do while we're living but grieving? Because we need to grieve. You're saying that we need to take the time out to grieve. How can we grieve and still live at the same time?
Well, I can tell you from my experience, my experience with grief, it was really overwhelming, and to put it simply, I didn't know what to do. But I am a Christian, and when everything became really overwhelming for me, I would get up on mornings and do what I knew to do best, to praise God. Even if I didn't feel to give God praise and honor, I would get up and I will pray and I will praise God. Sometimes I pray, I'm not feeling it, but I did it. And then I could feel His love coming through for me in that area. That's what I did. I work, I go to work, and I did my work like a robot. That's what you do. You operate outside of yourself, but you do it anyway. If you're not too ill or so to come out and work, but you manage. Strange enough, you manage.
Is there anything in the seminar that deals with, I mean, I'm a Christian and my mother's going to be upset, but for the person who's not a praying person, you know, I mean, what clinically, what psychology is there to manage going through the process? You know, I mean, your life cannot shut down, and that's the bottom line, at least for me. Like, I completely hear what you guys are saying in terms of you need to grieve, go through the process, but life cannot shut down while you're grieving. And if I'm not a praying person, what else is there? Is there anything psychology-wise, that is recommended?
You can find other outlets for your grief. Yes, you have to go to work. Yes, you have to put on the socially acceptable face. But in quiet moments, you speak to those closest to you, your friends. If you have someone who's a counselor, or seek the help of a counselor if you do not feel that talking to your friends is enough for you, if you do not feel that recreation or something to take your mind off it is enough for you. Yes, if you have a spiritual base, that's well, but if you don't, you find other outlets. You do the things that you used to do. You go to places perhaps where you would go with that person, but you focus on the positive memories of that person.
Can someone go through the process of grief by themselves? Is it recommended to deal with it? Because, me personally, I'm very sort of go in my room and handle stuff by myself. Is that a recommended thing to do, or do you guys suggest that that has its own dangers?
You need that alone time. I believe you need that alone time. There are times when you just zone out, and your mind work overtime on everything. You go back to your memories, good ones, not so good ones. But you need that alone time. There are times when you would need, there will come the time, more or less, when you would need intervention. Of course, you would have family support, you would seek counseling. You do what you can, what you want to do, because grief is different for the next person. It is different. What I may want to reach out, and the other person may not want to even talk to anyone. Like for the Grief Share program that we run, some people, they don't want to share. But with the program, when you get into the program and you hear other people's experiences, you would gladly share. You warm up to it, because you would hear things that resemble what you are going through.
So someone who starts off not wanting to share, because my concern is that, I know that it's not a matter of broad brushing it, but I do believe that, sometimes there's a right way and there's a wrong way. And while everyone grieves differently, I want our audience out there to see, if it is that they're going through grief. Some people, I've, doing a bit of research on it for the topic today, and the reality is there is a way of dealing with it incorrectly. And, what are some of the common ways that people would deal with it incorrectly?
Okay, I could, the common ways of dealing with grief incorrectly, it's one of them is thinking that you can keep yourself busy and it will all go away. It does not happen. All you end up feeling is very tired. I tried that once. I work, and during the day I will go to work, and I did everything. I was like, you feel like you can do anything, because you're trying to avoid that feeling, and you're preoccupied with your work. But at the end of the day, it comes back like a flood to you, and it comes back everything just comes back to you, and it's not a nice feeling. So I recommend that you go through grief. You don't try to avoid it. You don't try to go under it, over it, whatever. You try to go through it. You go with the feelings. I remember there were times I will just close my eyes, because the feeling, it is so severe, that kind of pain, and you do suffer. It's a place. We don't want to make this song too morbid, but you really, you end up in a dark place. We don't like to talk about grief, but grief is a part of life. It's a part of living. Since we make our appearance on this earth, we know that people die. But the impact when someone you love dies, it is quite different to knowing people dying all your life. So it is quite different. Another wrong way of dealing is alcohol. A lot of people turn to alcohol, and if you want to call it, yes, No, and it is a normal reaction to want something to numb the pain because it is severe pain, but it is not a good idea. Isolation is not really a good idea either. It's not. It's not. You want to share? On that?
Yeah, because, and that kept ringing out in my heart, the isolation. Sometimes you just find yourself just being alone, no association at all. Not, if any association, you're studying who. Because,
Well, Sarah talks about anger. So, I mean, if you're going through the anger stage, shouldn't isolation kind of be the right thing to do? Because you don't want to be angry around everyone.
yeah, but you don't want to get lost in just in a room all by yourself. And what happens, I think, too, you begin to deny yourself a lot of things. Sometimes you don't even want to cook. You don't even want to clean the house. In fact, let's don't go so far. What about even not even wanting to go to the bathroom? You know, so and then you have to make all these adjustments. Friends, new friends. Who do I call now? Can the time of the night it may be? You know, so many different things are happening. But I think that you see that isolation, and I think for me, even in remembering the void, that emptiness on the inside, you know, but. I guess all of that attached to the issues of what you're dealing with and just understanding and going through. But I think it's really difficult, but that isolation could be a bit dangerous.
Yes, it can be.
And too long in that place could be a bit scary at times because you begin to think all sorts of different things and I don't think you should want to go down that road
can
and then
lead to
probably
other
hearing
things.
voices, Gail.
Yes, yes.
I believe one of the important factors in dealing with the grief is sharing.
Right.
You know, when you have people that you can discuss with, because there are so many different aspects of grief, experiences that people go through. When you share it, you feel, you know, that you're not alone. So it helps. It helps.
We're going to go on a break now. I know everybody hates the breaks. Don't go anywhere, guys. We're going to pay some bills and then we're going to come back and continue our conversation about dealing with the loss of a loved one. Thank you guys for coming. Thank you to the audience for watching Care. We'll be right back. You know, on the break, you know, we were getting to talk to Shirlan.
Yes,
and,
I'm getting excited here now.
Yes.
And I'm excited because I didn't rush you there, right?
No, that's okay.
I'm excited because sometimes things happen divinely. I use that word a lot because that's how it works for me. And I was at the office that particular day and I picked up a newspaper article and the first line in the newspaper article said, dealing with the loss of a loved one. And I said, well, this person's speaking the same language with me. I have to see how I can get on to them. And that happened almost instantly. But the amazing thing about this is that this particular article was a stale news. I reading the news stale. But nevertheless, it was very needed. And in reading it, I was able to connect with Gail Neves. And the interesting thing is that my reason for connecting with her was twofold. One, because of the need of the organization, which focuses on the widows and widowers, and interacting with them and helping them to deal with grief. And also, so much death was taking place around my life, just about 2003 to all the way up to 2009, when first, no, let me go back, 2005, the first death that occurred, and it was a real shock, Doc, the death of my marriage. You know that fairy tale? So when
We're not discussing physical death now.
No.
So grief can happen without just dealing with the
it's a
death.
loss and it's a pain. And when I experienced that death in my marriage, it devastated me. And I realized that even after all those
So
years...
can you come to your seminar just with grief only, or is it only for people who've lost a loved one, for your seminar in particular?
No, the Grief Share program is just for grieving the death of a loved one.
Okay, so your own in particular, something specific. All right. Just for the audience to know.
Yes, so in dealing with that, the death of my marriage first, I realized that I did not deal with it. And then, of course, before that happened, my mom had died, and then my brother-in-law had died, and my big sister's husband died suddenly. So all of that death was just taking place around me, and how to deal with it. And meeting Gail, I was able to do the 13-week grief share program, and doing it, as I said, is twofold, because I wanted to be able to recommend the program to those out there, the widows, and by extension, the children as well, because they grieve as well, and somehow we focus
forget
on
them.
we
We
focus on
absolutely
the
forget
adult,
them.
right?
Yes.
And so I have recognized that they become like a friend. In one of the articles that I read as well and did. She wrote about she called them emotional orphans, because they're lost in the middle and not having anybody really to express. And then so much things going on in my mind, but take it slow, Shirley. The support system. So when I discovered that, I went through it, and what is beautiful about it is that even though you miss a session, the next one that you connect with, you can flow right into it. And again, you deal with the issues that are on the inside and that have been left dormant, because sometimes, again, as we said earlier, we deal with the grief too quickly. We move on, and because they're telling us, what happened to you, girl? It's 3 months, it's how much years passed, move on, man. But again, if you don't deal with it properly, I believe that you will end up having some pitfalls. And I really appreciated the program, and I can recommend it to anyone. It's very interactive. Yes, we do cry at times, but you understand that others go through some things like
You speak about crying, but I feel like a lot of people somehow mistake crying for weakness, and I think it's a necessary step. To cry, to sit down, or I might be wrong, but I do think that a lot of people have a misconception about crying. Would you agree?
Yeah, but crying is fine. I cry a lot. I cried and cried and cried. And weakness, when you're grieving, you don't need to be strong. People tell you be strong. I don't recommend telling someone to be strong. It is out of the picture. You just have to go through your grief. There are things that you would know as a person. There are limits. We all have limits. Some people go too far in everything. Some people overdo. We know that. But we're looking at normal circumstances. People, you would cry, you would grieve, you would be sad. It's extreme sadness. It is what it is.
Gail, what I have found too as well is that sometimes you don't even have to say anything. You can just be there for the person, just to listen. And that helps. And then I have found that even in grief share, in all of the sharing, you are listening to someone, and you're able to say, well, this worked for me, or this didn't work. And, so I found that listening helps as well, just being there and listening.
Now, in your particular case, you dealt with, the death of your marriage, the death of loved ones. Yes. But what happens when the grief is somewhat ongoing? There's no death yet. So how can I resolve something when the situation hasn't even been resolved? Like in Sarah's case, Sarah deals with a lot of cancer patients. So when it is that this grief is going on for what seems like forever, so there's no end. The person hasn't died, so there's no relief in feeling like, okay, well, they're dead or whatnot. What happens when it's just constant, and so you can't? How do you get over it? Because it's there in your face all the time, and every morning you get up, there's more. It's not done. There's no closure yet.
In essence, a death from cancer, you are prepared for it. Because from the moment you are diagnosed with an incurable cancer, you know that immediately you have lost the expectation of a normal lifespan. Your spouse has lost the expectation of spending the rest of their life with you. Your children have lost the expectation of you being there when they grow up. So you actually start to grieve at that point, because you know there's an end point coming. And you begin to go through all the cycles of grief even while you're being treated. And one of the things that is unique about treating cancer patients is we tend to have a lot of people involved. It's not supposed to be just you and your doctor. It's supposed to be a support nurse. It's supposed to be a counselor. If you have a spiritual background, it's also supposed to be whoever your spiritual counselor is, to get you, to keep you sane on this journey to what you know is coming. Because we know that death is coming. And the only kind of thing that cancer will ever do for you is it will give you time to prepare, to set your house in order, to heal broken relationships in your life. I mean, I have seen cancer do that. Members of family who have not spoken to each other for decades, because they know that this is happening, they will come forward. The apologies will happen, the healing can occur, so that at the time that the patient is beginning the physical process of dying, they are surrounded by peace. And that is a healthy grieving process for a family to go through. Unfortunately, there can be unhealthy processes which occur. People who are angry and who don't work through their anger in time, and sometimes the relative passes away and then they're left with guilt. Or if there are children involved and we don't tell the children what's happening until it's too late. And that's a story I can actually share, because I had a young mum who was dying of breast cancer, and she had 2 teenage children. One was 13 and one was 19. And she and the husband had spoken to the 19-year-old, but were trying to protect the 13-year-old because they thought, well, this is all going to be too much for her. And in February, I said to her, have you told both children what's going on? And that's when she told me that there was this one daughter who didn't have a clue. I said, you need to speak to her. Because we had begun to talk about what she could do to leave behind for the girls. And we talked about creating a memory box, which is their baby pictures, their baby clothes, writing letters to them for important days in their lives, like their wedding day, their graduation day, when they start college, their first baby. So she was doing all these letters. And like, you have a 13-year-old we need to talk to. And so I offered to do a family session, which we do. And it was while I was explaining what was going on, the 13-year-old put her hand up and said, actually, I am aware that Mummy is dying. Can you tell me how much time does she have left? And all of a sudden, all the pieces just fell into place. Because this was a child who had been researching, and she knew what was happening.
Can I say something?
Sure.
Presently, I also have a friend that her husband has been diagnosed with cancer stage 4. He was recovering well, and it has taken a turn again. But what I have found myself doing, Doc, is that every week I will call on my friend, and I would say, how are you doing today? And we will talk. So that's something you can do as well for someone that's going through that process, of what is eventually going to happen. I'm not saying that it's going to happen, but what eventually it is, and just a simple call.
What advice would you have now? Because we've spoken, it's a parenting television show, and something that you guys brought up, we miss the children in all of it, and I mean, we're discussing death, but I mean, with anything, even like, a mom who's being abused at home, everybody seems to forget that, well, but the child is watching this, and they're all focusing on the mother that's being abused, or the mother that's ill, or the mother that has cancer, but there are children involved. And as you say, they become emotional orphans because they sit back there and no one's taking them on, no one's asking. Is there any advice that you guys have for dealing with that, for dealing with the child, handling the child's grief? Don't all rush now.
Well, the Grief Share program, we have a session where we inform, it is really informative to the caregivers who would be taking care of the children who has lost their parent or parent. But we deal with the caregivers, because kids, they grieve differently depending on the age. Even adults, even like teens, they grieve differently. They grieve like in segments, because young children, they don't zone out like adults would. They would play normal, and then they would come out of the play and they will sit and be sad. That's how children operate in a grieving, situation. They grieve like that. So you as a parent or a caregiver, you have to explain to them. Don't tell them lies. Tell them the truth in a way that they can understand without being too, morbid or so. But tell them the truth. Tell them about heaven. Let them know, that you'll meet again with your parents. Give them hope. Grief is a hopeless situation, but we have to give hope and encourage each other. That is what grief is about. It's about the people who are left behind need to encourage each other. We need to educate ourselves about grief and the effects of grief. And
It's not just for 9 days, right?
no. It takes a very long time. Grief takes a long time, and each person will grieve for different periods of time. But back to children. Children need our support. Even when you may see them playing and you will think they're okay, and they are left.
We hear that all the time. We say, they're fine. Children are resilient. We hear that all the time. Children are resilient.
They seem to be, because they deal in segments, because they play, they must play. But after, it comes like an adult. You may bury yourself in your work, but after the work, all comes crashing down on you. So the adults have to be there for the children. A lot of parents, even with grief going on in a family, they go down with it and they forget the kids. Because when my son died, my mind was on my daughter. I was like, how is she going to deal with this? And you have to be careful what you say when you're grieving. People talk a lot when they're grieving. Some people talk out stuff. You have to be careful what you say when the children are present. You can't be saying, oh, this is my life gone. And so then when they hear that, so who am I? That's what they would be thinking. You have to be mindful of your kids when you're grieving, the utterances that you make or in grief, because you can hurt them even more. You can hurt them with your, lamenting, and because you would be surprised that they will come and ask you, so, Mommy, you don't love us? You're only thinking about John or whoever? It happens.
You wanted to say something?
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to piggyback on from Gail is the support. And I, again, in my personal experience, in practical experiences with those who I engage in, and even right in my home, the support system is so important, because not only did my first marriage die, but he also died as well. He died eventually, right? And coming out of that, I'm remarried now, thank God, and able to heal, and have been healing through that, and dealing with a whole lot. But presently now, even in my present marriage, my stepson, or let me say Doc, my son, his mom died at the age of 10, when he was 10, right? And one of the things in going through it now with him, now he's 24, right? But having a very, very difficult time as a result of that death, how many years ago, right? And what I have recognized is the support systems. The support systems are really crucial, not just organizations, but even a relative, an aunt being there, uncle being there to help this parent that's left with this child to bring up this child, because he suffered in that with that lack of continuous support. And I say that support is really, really needed for the children. Please do not just think it's just 9 days or 3 months and all the sleepovers are okay, but that's not all. Yes, we have the psychological part where you would take them in for that counseling, but if a parent can't meet that expense, right? You can be there. You can be there as a support system, because it goes a long way. And even with us at the organization, we do twice a year, we do an arts camp, a one-day arts camp. And in this arts camp, you have the children learn different types of art.
I'm going to stop you there because I
Yes.
want to hear a little bit more about the arts camp, and we have to go on a break. So when we come back, we're going to hear about the arts camp. Don't go anywhere, you're looking at care, and we're discussing grief and dealing with the loss of a loved one. Hi, and we're back. Today we're discussing grief, bereavement, dealing with the loss of a loved one. And, Sarah pointed out that it's not just death, but there's grief all around. And without dealing with it properly, it can come back to haunt us. We left off, and we're about to hear about an arts camp. So I'm going to let you finish that off. And then we're going to find out from the guys, how do guys grieve? And how do you grieve? And, how you'll give it to us from a guy's point of view.
Okay, so just touching again, we had one already for the year, and we're having another one on the 13th of August. It's a one-day arts camp, and it focuses on the children from the ages of 5 up to 16 years. We target dance, drama, music, jewelry making, art as well.
And this camp is for children that are coming out of that situation.
Yes, who have been dealing with grief, children of the widowed. Because again, the organization focuses on the needs of widows and widowers, and by extension, the family as well. And we pay great attention to the children, because I know what I have been going through, and I have heard from the widowed as well, and the male folk in it as well.
Wait, before we hand over the mic, can you just give us some information? Is there any way we can contact you to get involved in that camp?
Sure.
Or any widows or widowers out there and they want to get their children involved? How can we get in contact with you?
Again, Tema International, number 52 3rd Street, Barataria. Our contact information 475-8867 or 284-8402. I said that a bit quickly, 475-8867 or 284-8402.
That's okay. We're going to put it up onto our Facebook page so that if you've missed it, you can go onto the Facebook page and we will put that information up after. Thank you so much. Now from the men, how do men grieve? Because it's one thing when we tell women, be strong, toughen up, stop crying. So for a guy, it's like crazy, I'm sure.
I believe that's one of the problems with men. They're trained to ignore these emotional, attitude towards, they're trained to ignore these emotional feelings. That you're told not to cry, and be strong. Normally we are expected to help others who are grieving. You hold them up and whatever. And
you guys are the designated punching bags.
This is what, they're trained to be. But we don't realize, I didn't realize that grief has such an effect on people. When you do this program and you understand what people go through, then you know that, you have a role to play in the lives of your family and friends. In the sense that you have to understand when you see people doing some things that seems abnormal, it's not that they want to do it, but they are being affected in some way. It's, something is happening. They're not talking, they're very silent, they're doing little crazy things, they're forgetful, These are the things you have to be aware of, and it helps with your family. It helps relationship with your family when you know these things.
So he's right back to being the support system, because that's all he's talking about, helping. You notice that? How do men deal with grief?
Oh. Well, there are many ways men deal with grief. Sometimes we tend to mask it. You pretend nothing is wrong, you hide and cry. As we discussed before, you go down by the bar and you take 2 drinks and you numb the pain, but it comes back. So when you know this program, when you go through this program, you realize that these things doesn't really help. You're supposed to work through it. It's the only way you can be helped.
But then how can you, you're in a marriage, and you guys could probably tell us firsthand, you're in a marriage, and both of you guys are grieving. The guy feels like, okay, well, I feel like I need to be the strong one to support my wife through it, but the poor guy he's dealing with grief as well.
I think this is where God comes in. That is where love comes in. This is where you have to understand who you are, what you're about, where your center lies. God must be your center. You must have God as your center in order to do these things. You have to love unconditionally. You know, you have to be aware.
I just want to interject here because in dealing with my present husband, when we got married, right? No, yes, I'm telling a little secret, but it's not a bad secret. But the amazing thing was that he, when I got to the home there, he still had clothing from his first wife, and that was 10 years later. And so when I did the program, I have to go back to the program, I was able now to help him to come to terms with a lot of hidden issues and being able to move forward. Because I think sometimes they just say, okay, I have to live, the bills have to be paid, so I just go on. And for him it was difficult as well, even getting back into a relationship, you know, but thank God I came along.
Okay, so we just have about 4 more minutes. We have about 4 more minutes before we go. And I just want to hear 2 things. I know Sarah had, during the break, there were some things that you thought that you wanted to see. What are some of the things, obviously coming from the UK, coming back to Trinidad, we're not exactly there yet. What are some of the things that you think that we could see, maybe without the government intervention, just little different groups or whatnot?
I would love to see more art camps happening not just twice a year, but at least once a month in communities across Trinidad and Tobago, because there are children who are grieving in communities, particularly communities that are dealing with gang warfare. I'd love to see that maybe the NGOs can step up, or private citizens, corporate citizens can host at least one event a month for children, to be children, to express their grief, be it painting, writing, art, to be able to relate to other children, and 1 or 2 counselors. That's what I would love to see for our grieving children.
Can I just say something here, please? Again, TEMA is a non-profit organization. We focus on the needs of widows and widowers. And we have been able to incorporate a number of different areas. So we have the counseling aspect, we have the spiritual support, we have the maintenance, because you would need that from time to time. Then we have the domestic aspect, and of course the nutritional support. So again, feel free to contact TEMA International at 284-8402 or 475-8867. Gail?
Okay, our Grief Share program, right now registration is in process. The numbers to call is 750-0911 or 221-3161. Don't miss it. This is the time to heal. If you're grieving and you need that help, call us and we'll fit you into the program. The numbers are 221-3161 or 750-0911. It's the cost is $200. It's for it covers the 13-week session. We meet every Thursday at Trinidad Christian Center. This is where yes. Well, through the program you get a booklet. It's a video. You look a video plus you get the booklet to work on your own, and we have group sessions where we discuss the information that is seen on the video.
Perfect. Thank you guys so much for coming, and thank you to our care audience. Once again, our hour is up. See you next week.